All right, the TLDR on the sponsorship status is that I didn't get to the goal, but to honor the sponsors who did answer the call, I've gone ahead and produced this top 10 list of what I find most interesting in Rust 1.79.0. More on sponsorship stuff at the end. Now for the news. Rust 1.79.0 was released today, June 13th, 2024, thanks to the hard work of hundreds of contributors. What made the top 10 list? Nothing from the blog. I'm not wasting top 10 space on blog items that are meh and explained just fine in writing. I will cover things like number 1, 5 new WASM target features have been implemented. At the time these were merged into Rust, there were 10 Phase 4 or Phase 5 WASM target features that Rust hadn't implemented yet. So to really catch up, we've got 5 more to go. The WASM specification uses phases to describe the maturity of a feature that is being defined. Phase 4 is production ready, and Phase 5 means the feature is being merged into the official WASM spec. The first WASM feature is non-trapping float-to-int conversions. It adds 8 new instructions that, when converting from an integer type to a floating point type, saturate to the biggest or lowest floating point value if the integer is out of bounds, instead of trapping. Trapping is WebAssembly's way of saying immediately abort execution with an error, or in other words, crashing. So you can probably imagine use cases where someone would like to convert an integer to a float without potentially crashing the program. The second WASM feature is import-export of mutable globals. This is fairly self-explanatory. It enables nice things like being able to use globals as thread local storage. The third WASM feature is sign extension operators. It provides 5 new instructions for sign extending smaller integer types into larger integer types. The fourth WASM target feature is bulk memory operations. This feature provides a bunch of utilities for bulk copying, filling, initializing, and dropping memory, as well as ways to init and copy function tables. The fifth and last WASM feature is extended constant expressions, which adds a bunch of instructions to the list of instructions which can be used in a constant expression. These instructions all deal with integer addition, subtraction, or multiplication. Number 2, the lib.name configuration item in Cargo could inherit dashes from the package name. This has now been fixed by intercepting the dashes and converting them to underscores, and is yet another morality tale about the dangers of allowing dashes anywhere. Number 3, the read-only write lock clippy lint that was added in Rust 1.73 as an allow by default lint has been promoted to warn by default, meaning the world will actually see it now. I think this lint is pretty cool because it warns you when you are taking a blocking write lock, which has the potential to tank your performance when you're only reading the value, which means you can use a non-blocking read lock instead. Number 4, the manual clamp lint was added way back in Rust 1.66, but as an allow by default lint. Now it has been promoted to a warn by default lint, which means you'll see this one too. This lint is super cool because it catches all sorts of manual clamping implementations and tells you to just call the clamp method instead. Number 5, Rust allows re-exporting functions in different locations under a new name with the syntax use path to a function as some new function name, unless you wanted to name that function main and use it as the entry point of your binary. The main function was special cased and didn't provide for the same handling as every other function. Well, now that's been fixed. So if you've been itching to rename your main function and store it in a library somewhere, you can go ahead and do it. Kinda cool. Number 6. Oh look, it's Ed. Ed made it so that cargo add now tries to respect the minimum supported Rust version of your local package when it is adding dependencies whose newest version may have a conflicting MSRV setting. Cargo add will emit a warning if it downgrades the version of the dependency you add to keep things MSRV compatible. And never fear, there is a flag you can add if you want to go back to the old behavior. Number 7, manual unwrap or default is a new warn by default lint that checks to see if you are manually writing out a match expression when you could just call the unwrap or default method instead. Number 8, const is empty is a new warn by default lint that checks to see if you are calling is empty on a constant value and tells you to knock it off because you already know the answer. Number 9, there are 2 new Tier 3 VisionOS targets for using Rust on Apple's Vision Pro. I've never had the opportunity to try out the Vision Pro, but now maybe I'll have to take a peek. There are two targets because one is for the actual hardware and the other is for the simulator that runs on macOS. Number 10. There's now a blanket implementation of FromIterator for a tuple containing a pair of items that implement the default and extend traits. The obvious collection that satisfies these constraints is the vector. What does this really mean? Let's say we have a vector of numbers and we want to produce two new vectors, one with the values doubled and another with the values squared. You could certainly do that by creating two mutable vectors and then in a loop pushing values into them. But now you can also use iterators and functional style programming to collect the output of a tuple into two separate vectors, which in this case will contain the values of the original vector doubled and squared respectively. Pretty cool. That's the top 10 interesting things for today. Now I'd like to thank my 15 GitHub sponsors. Without your sponsorship, there literally would not be a video at all today. I especially need to thank the Trust One team whose organization level sponsorship makes a huge difference. You are all amazing. I am 16% of the way towards my first sponsorship goal, and this video is the result. If you'd like to see more and deeper dives into Rust news, please sponsor me on GitHub. The more sponsors I get, the more news I can produce. Who knows, maybe I could turn this into a full-time job someday. And Liam Woodley, thank you for your comment last time suggesting that I seek sponsorship from the Rust Foundation. I was able to get in contact with folks from the foundation and I was told, quote, "We need to discuss internally to see what might be feasible as it doesn't neatly fit into our usual grant award categories." So maybe we'll see what happens. Today's cover artwork is by Nell Shamrell Harrington, whom you may remember from the many RustConf keynotes from past years. This Ferris evokes a terracotta feel and may have been influenced by Aztec culture and mythology, though admittedly the Aztecs weren't known for depicting joyful smiles, which leads us to conclude that this rendition of Ferris must be a fusion of Aztec culture and Miss Minutes, the rogue AI from Marvel's multiversal Loki series. Now that evil AI is invading even our cover artwork, the world will never be the same. If you want more videos like this, sponsor me on GitHub.